Hello, personal productivity enthusiasts and community. Welcome to Anything But Idle, the productivity news podcast. Today's show is brought to you by W3C Web Services. And let's see here. I'm Ray Sidney-Smith.
And I'm Augusto Pinaud.
And we're your hosts for Anything But Idle. This is episode 27, and we're recording this on November 2nd, 2020. Each week, we cover and discuss the productivity news headlines of the week. And to do that, we have two panelists with us today to talk about all things in the personal productivity and technology space. First and foremost, we have Dr. Frank Buck. Most people are overwhelmed by the amount of paper and digital information in their lives. Frank Buck makes organization easy so you can increase productivity, decrease stress, and enjoy life. He's one of the global gurus, #1 rated time management gurus in the world for 2019 and 2020. And his career path took him from band director, from band to director to principal to central office administrator, and now to a productivity coach and speaker. Welcome to Anything But Idle, Frank.
Good to be with you, Ray.
Fantastic. And next up, we have Chris Keller from Appigo. And let me find his introduction. Here we go. Chris Keller is a longtime productivity enthusiast as an individual worker and also as a manager of the To-Do Cloud productivity application, which is one of the earliest in the market. He leads product and strategy for the company in addition to marketing, strategy, and independent software project management under the App Dev company. Needless to say, he wears multiple hats to get stuff done. And so with that, welcome to Anything But Idle, Chris.
Thank you. Nice to be with you today.
Fantastic. Great to have you all. We have a full panel today and we have a full show. So welcome to our audience watching live. And of course, thank you to our listeners of the podcast. Today, we are going to be celebrating a couple of things. One is just a couple of days ago, we had Checklist Day, which is a day dedicated to checklists. There's a holiday for everything, as well as Author's Day. And actually, November happens to be NaNoWriMo, which is the National Novel Writing Month. And so just to start off conversation, I wanted to talk a little bit about checklists and then a little bit about some writing productivity topics. So first and foremost, what's your favorite checklist? How do you like using checklists? What's the goal of the checklist that you use?
I'll jump in. My favorite checklist is, when I'm writing a blog post, it's also a podcast, it's also a YouTube video, that's also a newspaper column. There are so many little steps along the way, and none of them are hard. The hard thing is just remembering all of them. So just having that little checklist to go through and this one's done, this one's done, this one's done, it makes all the difference.
I like that. I'll also contribute. So Ray and Augusto, two come to mind. One is my honeydew checklist. That's probably the most important checklist. And my wife has a whiteboard. And every Saturday, she's got the checklist for her honey and her kids. And so we pretty much do that checklist. And if we don't do it, we don't get to do fun things for that Saturday. So that's pretty important for us. And it covers the basic things. So every week it tends to repeat. My kids have a checklist, which is their work checklist. On Saturday mornings, they check each one of their responsibilities over the course of that week. The second checklist that comes to mind is a webinar checklist. And in a previous role, we managed several hundred webinars. And it was really complicated to do those webinars well. And we actually put together a 6-month checklist. Now, 6 months is a long time, but the first couple months of that checklist were identify topics, identify speakers, invite those speakers. And then we have a very detailed 6-week checklist on the back end of that 6 months. And we would say at 6 weeks, we want to know who our partners are, who we're going to advertise with, because we were always funding to get new people listening. And then we'd have a 4-week checklist, which was very specific to content. So who's the speaker? What have they prepared? How we reviewed their content? And then we'd promote it. And so I'd say it was probably a 150 step checklist that was very helpful to just nail those webinars.
That's awesome. For me, my favorite checklist is my do not do list. That thing has been with me for, I don't know, over 10 years probably or more. And it is incredible to review it often and remember, oh yeah, this is why I stopped doing this, and I need to remember not to do it ever again. So that's probably my favorite list, to do not do list.
Fantastic. I do like to think about checklists and task lists as separate entities. So those of you who are thinking about what a checklist for me really does is it's something that's repeatable, right? So I want it to manifest. It's kind of like a template of things that I want to go to be done on any given time sequence or frequency. And so I try to make sure that I'm doing those kinds of checklist development items as kind of a form of template. And that way, it sounds like everybody else here on the panel kind of does it in that same way. It's the things that you want to do in a repeatable fashion consistently with some kind of standard. Mine, I consider a standard of excellence, as I call it. And I want to make sure that the things on the checklist will help me at least achieve that standard, and which is really quite useful in so many ways. And Stacy Harmon from Harmon Enterprises is saying that she loves her packing checklists. Makes travel so much easier, and that is absolutely true, Stacy. I love a good travel checklist, and maybe someday I will go back to traveling like I was before, and then we'll be able to actually use that travel checklist again. But yes, absolutely, travel checklists and packing checklists are really, really useful. Okay, so any interesting or useful writing checklists for those authors listening, since we are celebrating a little bit of Authors Day in NaNoWriMo. Any quick tips before we get into the headlines of the week?
Go, Chris.
Okay, my comment. So I aspire to be a writer. I'm not an active writer today writing a book, but I am trying to dedicate time to the idea. And so my checklist is a series of things to read and a series of things to write. And my journal is the place where I'm spending most of that time. So it's a daily and a weekly thing for me. I'm most successful on a weekly basis. And I essentially go through mentally professional, personal, and then a couple other areas of my life as I'm writing in my journal.
Yes, a person who has done NaNoWriMo a couple of times and who has published a couple of novels, for the people who are there, I will set consistency. You can go 1,200 words every day, or you can try to do the crazy 20,000 the night before. Most of the people who tried that never finished NaNoWriMo. So it is writing. Writing is not different. As they said that there is nothing better that have written, but nothing worse than writing. And I may need to agree with that as a person who has published some books, but it's still take it fun and make it consistently every day.
And this is where checklists can come into play. One of the things I have in terms of my own book writing checklist, as well as actually any written material, so say blog writing or otherwise, I have a checklist of all the items that I want to cover in any particular production process. And that allows me to basically go from, whatever I'm writing to completion as quickly as possible. And when I follow it, I do a much better job than when I don't follow it. So with that, let's get into our stories of the week. Augusto, what's our first story of the week? You're muted.
I do that all the time. It's just to make sure that you're paying attention. The first story of the week is Apple releasing Technology Preview 115. It's not on the news today, but there is a new event coming next week. And they are releasing 115. We are hoping or guessing that it's coming to be related to that. So Apple released this performance improvement reviews of what is coming so people can test, or developers can test what's coming with that. So the next news, talking about this event that was announced this morning, Apple referenced an unreleased 2020 16-inch MacBook Pro in the Bootcamp upgrade. For the people who don't know, Bootcamp is a piece of software that allows to run Windows natively in a MacBook. So you can run them at the same time, or you can run one or the other. And it's an incredible piece of software. So on the last version, there is a mention for a 16-inch, and we are assuming is going to come with a new ARM chipset that is going to be officially announced next week.
Apple Silicon.
Uh, sorry, with the Apple Silicon based on the ARM technology.
Absolutely. There you go. Apple would be very upset with you if they heard
True.
you saying
And
that.
I deserve for them to be upset with me.
Okay, moving right along. What's our next Apple story?
The next Apple story is Apple One launches. So Apple finally bring all their subscriptions and services under one umbrella. So iCloud, iMusic, and Arcade finally under one umbrella, and they changed the prices, so the prices are really really attractive if you have more than one. If you have music and something else, Apple TV for example, it's really really attractive now to jump to the family instead of keeping them for separate. So you can now go, even if you have already planned, they are prorating, so you can get or jump into the Apple One bandwagon right away.
So that we're clear, there are 6 products within Apple One: Apple Music, Apple TV Plus, Apple Arcade, which is their game platform, iCloud, Apple News Plus, and Apple Fitness Plus, which they say is coming in late 2020. So all 6 products get bundled into one flat monthly rate. There's an individual plan, which is currently $14.95 US per month. The family plan, which ends up being $19.95 per month for up to 5 people, 6, I guess, with yourself. So yourself plus 5 other people. And then Premier, which is $30 a month, $29.95 per month US, and that gives you up to 5 other people as well, but includes that I guess the others stop at iCloud, but the others have Apple News Plus and Fitness Plus attached onto that beyond the family plan. So if you go to apple.com/Apple-1, you can see all the details there for Apple One. But cool subscription concept. They're trying to make money off of services.
Well, actually, if you had any of those subscriptions before, if you were having music and Apple TV and cloud, it's now cheaper. For the first time, you can save money with Apple. That's as an Apple fan and person who has many of their services. This is the first time that you can actually subscribe to all of them and make it cheaper.
That's fantastic.
My quick comment: I have 4 kids and a wife, and so we're a family of 6, and we're all scattered about with the Pandora subscription, Disney Plus, Netflix, Hulu, and Spotify. So my family is really interesting to try and consolidate into this Apple subscription, and their pricing is really aggressive. I do wonder if it's an early mover pricing that's going to raise at some point, or how long that aggressive pricing will last.
Yeah, it's definitely a play for volume to capture those customers who don't want to pay for something to pay for something and consolidate, certainly with a lower price point. And then at some point they'll, it's not bait and switch, but they will go up to a higher price point at some point. They have to. Yeah, that's same thing happens with Amazon Prime, right? Amazon Prime was really low and inexpensive for a while, and they had to creep up the price at some point because they had to keep up with the licensing fees for all of that content. So it makes a lot of sense. Alrighty, Gusto. Next up.
So the next news we have, again, continuing to the Apple bandwagon, Apple invites developers to get a one-on-one guidance for their engineer before their Apple Silicon Mac launch. So we all know it's coming. They announced it in July, and now we know there is an event on Tuesday. But before that, Apple had announced around October 28th that event was going to come, especially for developers to talk about the difference and all that. So it is great to see Apple not only embracing their Apple Silicon, but really bringing the developers before the game, so that way they can developers can be ready with that.
Art is providing us with the chuckles. He said Apple will bundle the package with only the left earbud. They'll charge a premium for the right one.
Yeah, there is a premium for the right one. You don't need the right one. Who wants stereo music? But continue on the Apple news. The next one is Apple Pay is now available in Chicago to use with Apple Express. And Apple has been making significant progress into public transportation in the United States with the Apple Pay. It is really convenient. You can do it. I'm in New Jersey. You can do it in New York. You put your watch, no touch, no nothing, and it works like a charm. So I think it's great that it's now extended to the folks in Chicago.
Fantastic. Next up,
Our,
Apple
our
Bear.
next
Go ahead.
news is Apple Bear. Apple Bear released version 1.7.21 and includes a weak link export for iOS, an update on their import tool for Evernote files, and a couple more improvements. But it is big that they are finally making this link, and especially the import tool for Evernote and the Evernote files.
Yeah, so this is Bear's 4th anniversary, and so they have been out for 4 years now. Can you believe that? And so yeah, so they're celebrating their 4th anniversary, their 4th birthday with a new wallpaper and a new look. So yeah, you guys can go over there and check out Apple Bear if you are using Apple Bear. So very cool. Okay, next up, Microsoft has some news out. In essence, they are going to be forcing Internet Explorer users to open some websites explicitly and only in Microsoft Edge, which is their new Chromium-based browser. So Microsoft Edge went through a redesign, a redevelopment that is, and they left their old architecture behind, and now they are Chromium-based. And with that, YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram will not be any longer accessible on Internet Explorer. And with that, I say, good riddance. Who on earth is still using Internet Explorer? Folks, please get rid of Internet Explorer and and
I will mute voluntarily in this case, so I don't need to answer that question.
no, I know that there's some enterprise environments that still require IE for some very legacy applications, but they are security risks, and unless you have them very much behind the strongest firewall in the world, and even then, you're opening yourself up to greater risk. So
Yeah, friends don't let friends use Explorer.
exactly. So good on Microsoft for pushing us into that space. And kind of while we're at it, I'm going to make a note that Windows 10 is now removing Adobe Flash along with all of the major browsers that are committed to doing that going forward. So Adobe has deprecated and ended their support for Flash. Apple, Facebook, Google, and Mozilla, which produces the Firefox browser, all by the end of December, are basically killing off Adobe Flash and the Flash Player application. Windows 10 will actually preemptively uninstall Flash Player from the systems before they end of life their support. So basically, by the end of December, we can put up the gravestone, we can put up the tombstone for Adobe Flash Player and Adobe Flash as a whole. And again, big security risk, big hole in security. So just glad to see that come to a close. Augusto, you want to talk a little bit about Microsoft's
Yes,
support
as a
for?
person who coach people in the transition to make iPad their main machine and the iPad only movement, one of the complaints I always hear with people who is in corporate and have they use Microsoft product is, okay, but it doesn't work as well as in my Mac. And it's true. It's been subpar for many years. But finally, Microsoft is rolling full iPad OS trackpad support for Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. And I think especially in Excel, that is going to be a game changer for the people who use on their iPad Pros and else, being able to really use the second button, really use the mouse as is required really on Excel.
I mean, this just goes to show how much Microsoft has embraced and more of the ecosystem, more of the mobile ecosystem. But really, they've turned into a cloud services company. Really, they're trying to get the Azure architecture in a place where Windows and any other software that they're developing is both amenable to other tools, bringing Samsung onto the Windows 10 platform so you can use Android applications directly on your Windows 10 desktop, making Microsoft Word and Excel and many of these applications work seamlessly across the Apple and Android ecosystems. They're really doing a great job of really opening themselves up in this way and showing themselves to be a cloud services company. And to Art's point here, Art is noting here that money grows above the trees in the clouds, and it's absolutely true. I think Microsoft knows where the money lies, and that's in the cloud, and they're doing a good job there. So.
I'll comment just for a brief moment. They've seen AWS and Amazon, who surged in the cloud, right? They've made huge strides as a very profitable business, and Microsoft Azure is a very formidable competitor to the AWS cloud services. But Microsoft's been a bit slow, even though technically a couple of my insider friends say that Azure is better performing than the AWS cloud. So Microsoft's been a little slow. They're a real product feature function company and haven't been as visionary as some of these other companies. So it's interesting to see them doing a little bit of catch up. I must admit, I'm not using Edge right now. I've used Chrome and Firefox for so long, I've forgotten about Internet Explorer. And so I'm a bit out of the weeds, but I've seen that Chrome and Firefox have really advanced the ball in capabilities. And then it's interesting as well to comment on Adobe Flash. Back in 2000, I was working with Flash, and it was amazing how it would create these interactive experiences. But the JavaScript language and the technologies around JavaScript have really evolved so that so much of that user experience can be built out without some of the static animation tools like Adobe Flash. So it's interesting to see all these things happening.
Yeah, I mean, HTML5 really put the nail in the coffin for Adobe Flash, and of course, with the advances of all of the various frameworks around JavaScript and some of these other languages and frameworks, it makes a whole lot of sense. Art is noting here that Edge on mobile is a nice browser option. So it didn't even consider Microsoft Edge on mobile. But and Art knows why. But I will definitely now install and at least give it a check. So thank you for that, Art. And so our final article before we hit the midway point.
Yes, the final before our midpoint is Luna Display. It's on Kickstarter right now for Windows. Luna Display was a device coming initially for the Mac before even Apple announced Sidecar that connect in the USB 3 or the display port and connect then from there to the iPad. And give you the ability to use the iPad as a second screen with really minimal, if any, lag. But they have always been a Mac solution. Now they are bringing that to Windows. So there is right now starting in Kickstarter. I have a couple of clients who have used it because that when you put the Luna Display on a Mac and the iPad, you can even use the iPad with the Apple Pencil with their software as a tablet for drawing. So it's also really, really cool to do both things, to use it as a second display with no lag. If you're traveling anyways, grab now your iPad, grab your laptop, PC, put the Luna Display, and you will be able to have two monitors wherever you go.
This is phenomenal. I can't wait. I mean, seriously, this is really, really amazing, and I'm looking forward to seeing this. Again, I'm cross-platform all day long, and the ability to use the Luna Display to be able to extend to an iPad. I'm even thinking then, whatever comes out in terms of the next iPad Pro, that would be a really nice extension monitor to be used when I'm at my desk, and then I can walk away and use it as a normal iPad on the go when I'm away from my desk. But I really like that idea, and good on Astropad for putting together the Luna Display for Windows.
Yeah, no, not only that, I don't know yet about the Windows. I don't know if that will be possible on Windows, but in the Mac, if you have a Mac Mini, you can connect it to make basically a headless Mac Mini. So you connect it, and then you make the iPad your main monitor for that Mac Mini instead of having connected a monitor or anything else. So if that is possible on the PC world, that will be really fantastic. You now can get a cheap headless PC, put that in the back, and now your monitor is movable and is touchscreen and everything else.
Interesting. That's an interesting use case. I never even thought about having kind of like a little mini box, kind of sitting there. Because I guess you could do that with the Mac Mini as well. You basically have the Mac Mini sitting there, no screen. When you want to use the Luna Display, for your iPad, using the iPad and then walking away with it.
Correct.
Fascinating. All right. Any comments before we end our first set of headlines? Okay, wonderful. So with that, we're going to take a break for our sponsor this week, and then we'll be back after the break with more headlines.
Did you know half of small businesses don't have websites and half don't make it past 1 year in business? Are these stats correlated? We're not sure, but we think you should have a website. W3C Web Services provides affordable managed WordPress website hosting along with VPS, domain name registration, and other small business focused services. For listeners of this podcast, you can book a free 30-minute digital marketing strategy session when you purchase a new hosting plan, $150 value. Once you purchase your new hosting plan, forward the receipt to support@w3cinc.com with the podcast title in the subject line of the email message, and we'll get you scheduled for your digital marketing strategy session. Head over to anythingbutidle.com/webhosting and get started with your small business website today. And now, back to your show.
Welcome back, everybody, to Anything But Idle. Before the break, we were covering our headlines of the week, and so we're going to continue our headlines with some more stories. And so one of those first stories is that Lee Kun-hee, who was the kind of the person who built Samsung kind of from the ground up. He passed away in Seoul this week. He was 78, and yeah, it's kind of crazy. You know, he's the father of Samsung, and oh no, his father was the founder of Samsung. He was the son of the founder of Samsung. My apologies. But yeah, just wanted to let everybody know that kind of that global giant has passed away. Anything else about that before we move on? No? Wonderful. Okay. Next up, I had come across a Doist article, and I thought this was really interesting and wanted to kind of have everyone's opinion on this. In essence, Doist came up with an article they called The 7 Cognitive Biases That Make Us Suck at Time Management. Our brains are hardwired to sabotage our productivity. Can we do anything about it? And what they did was they listed 7 different cognitive biases, and I'll just list them for everybody, and we can kind of point out any ones that we have come across and our thoughts on it. So 1 is the mere urgency effect, 2, the Zeigarnik effect, 3, the planning fallacy, 4, the sunk cost fallacy, 5, present bias, complexity bias, and then 7, the hedonic adaptation. And so does anybody have any experience with any of these fallacies, these cognitive biases, and your thoughts in terms of the article?
Can I call my lawyer? That's the only way I'm willing to admit any of this one.
Well, you know, the Zeigarnik effect, that's the one where when you're in the middle of something, you want to finish it. I know David Allen talks a lot about that, and I think it goes back to waiters seem to be able to remember what people had ordered until the check had been closed out. As soon as the check was closed out, it's sort of erased from their memory bank, so that that your mind is hanging on to those things that are unfinished, and as soon as they're finished, then it clears it out.
Yeah, it's kind of the reason why when someone sings a song and you don't hear the rest of that song, then the song is kind of stuck in your head, and it's kind of that little part is on loop. That's really the Zeigarnik effect. It's that our brain doesn't have the ability to let go of something until they feel like it's complete, and that's the idea. Once it's complete, then your mind can, of course, reduce the stress related to it.
You know, the 7 of them are really important, but the mere urgent bias, I think it's really well represented by the so-called Eisenhower matrix, you know, where you tend to pay attention to what is urgent, what is not urgent, what is important and not important, and really how those things that are urgent and non-important tend to take, you know, precedence over the things that may be less urgent but really more important, and how that tend to affect people, you know, and how we miss things like that.
Yeah, so that folks have kind of an idea, the mere urgency effect or the bias is as Jewess notes here, our tendency to prioritize urgent tasks over non-urgent tasks, even when the non-urgent tasks provide us with a greater reward. And so we tend to basically bias toward the latest and loudest, as David Allen would call it. Going back to David Allen again, but the idea here is that just because something is urgent, we should not lean into that urgent thing all the time, right? The idea here that I always use is clients who call me and expect me to deal with something right this moment because it's urgent to them, and I say call 911 if it's that important, but otherwise everything else can be planned, and that is the training that I walk my clients through, because they have to remember that urgency is not always the most important thing. Those are two different things. And once you can bifurcate those in your mind, you can actually truly be more productive, because you don't get stuck in this mindset that just because something lands on your lap, that it's hot potato and you have to deal with it right now lest you get burned. So we need to remember that as we go through, and the mere urgency bias, just learning that fact is really important. A couple of other Did I hear
Yeah,
someone?
and I
Go
think,
for it,
Ray,
Ray.
along that line, if you do jump into whatever is urgent, somebody else drops something on you, you drop everything, you do that, you teach them that they can treat you that way, that in the future they can wait to the last minute, drop it on you, and you'll somehow get it done.
Yes. Next up was the planning fallacy. And again, quoting Duist here, they said, our tendency to underestimate the time it will take to complete a future task, despite knowledge that previous tasks have generally taken longer. And what I usually do is I say, okay, how long do I think this is going to take? And then triple it. And that's
Yeah.
usually a good way for me to figure out how long something is truly going to take, not just double it, but triple it. And that gives you enough lead room, enough space to look at that project and say, okay, if it is going to take, I think it's going to be a month. Okay, let me expand that to 3 months. And then say, okay, is that 3 months acceptable to me? And then I can decide whether or not I'm going to take on that project. And so many times we look at the planning fallacy and we presume, okay, this is going to take 3 hours, when in reality it's going to take 7 hours, or it's going to take 8 hours. And that, by its very nature, can either motivate or demotivate us from taking on that project. And that's good to know. I mean, it's just good to know so you can be aware of what projects you're willing to take on and which ones you aren't.
It is important in this planning fallacy. When I do coaching, I always tell people that one of the things we need to break on this planning fallacy is the idea that we are going to have more time tomorrow. People come and say, "Oh yeah, let's plan it in 3 months because I will have more time." No, 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 no. You cannot see all the time you're not going to have in 3 months. But it's something that I see regularly and often with people thinking, okay, if we put it in 2 weeks, I will have more time then. When no, it's part of this planning fallacy. No, you think you have this illusion that you are going to have more time when in reality you will have the same or less.
Yeah. And you're just mortgaging the future. You're just sticking that stuff 2 weeks, and then all the other stuff that's going to come up, and then it's just a mess 2 weeks from now.
Yeah, it's a real thing. What we're talking about here, it plays into procrastination, where the planning fallacy allows our procrastination to kick in, and we say, I'll do that tomorrow, next week, so forth. I have a fairly controversial idea to this, and that is simply planning to the next visual node or the next turning point, and delaying giving specifics beyond that where possible. Right? It depends on the situation and whether it's a manager that's expecting this forecast or this prediction. They'll need to get something. But in my own life, I try and plan hours of time and effort, and I plan short sprints, if you will, without knowing exactly how long the entire project is going to take when I have that flexibility, because it allows me to then box in my time and say, okay, 60 minutes, I'm going to do this. The next 12 hours, I'm going to do this. The next 7 days, I'm going to do this. And I can start to use time to my advantage to accelerate my current trajectory.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that we all need to approach projects in ways in which motivate us and also show us real progress. Going back to the article and present bias as well as complexity bias, both of those things come into mind, right? One is we have a tendency to look at the planning fallacy and presume that things won't take as long, and therefore we can just do it all now. When in reality, if we just chunked it down to smaller individual parts, even if we don't plan out further in the future like you, Chris, you can still be more productive by basically planning that project out in chunks that you're going to work out, say sprints or otherwise. The other side to that is I see this all the time. People presume that what they are going to get now is more important than what they're going to get in the future. And many times the short-term reward of doing that little bit of work here is not necessarily the ultimate reward, which is why we procrastinate so often. And it's probably also why we think complexity over simplicity. We think that the more complex solution is going to solve the very gnarly problem in front of us. And I try to have people understand that complexity to simplicity and ease to difficulty is a very different set of X and Y axes, right? We have to think about these things from the perspective of, is it simple or hard? And just because simple and difficult are different doesn't mean that easy, that something that's easy to difficult is the same thing, right? Simple to complex, that is, to easy and difficult. We have to keep those things in mind as we make our way forward in terms of projects.
Another adage that I like, Ray, is perfection is the enemy of good enough. Mm-hmm. And perfection is complex for me. So the simpler solution is often good enough, which gets you value and you can move on.
Yeah, I call that the progress imperative, right? Progress over perfection. And as an ongoing recovering perfectionist, I know that I get hung up all the time on wanting to have my standard of excellence be perfection. And this is why I talk about my standard of excellence, which is, for me, excellence is not perfection. It's take perfection and nudge it back a little, right? Lest I would never go online live every week on anything but idle, right? It's just not worth it to me if I want perfection. But if I can set it as a standard of excellence for me, the standard of excellence is that we're going live at this time every week for the show. And what has to happen? Progress has to happen. That's the progress imperative. And if we can keep that in line, then man, we can get things done because mistakes will happen, stuff will come up, but you know what? We'll make it work. And that's really the most important part of it.
Yeah, an artist is mentioning, can the planning fallacy be mitigated through better time tracking and projection? And, maybe most people, I don't think, can't, because the problem is we tend to always underestimate how long things are going to take. And as you were saying, we tend to consider that things that are going to come in the future are not going to be more important than what the things we have right now. So I think those two things in general are not going to allow us to mitigate, this planning fallacy by better time tracking and projection in general.
Yeah. And we also don't take into account what other little monkey wrench may be thrown in there. Maybe a job takes about 2 hours. We think it's going to take 2 hours. Under normal circumstances, it would take 2 hours, but the power goes out. The scanner stops working. The printer ran out of ink. You got an emergency phone call. You never know what gets thrown in there that sort of stops the whole process.
Absolutely. All right. Any final thoughts on the article? Otherwise, I will recommend to watchers and listeners to really check out the article. It'll be in the show notes, but it's worth checking out all 7 of the fallacies. There are actually hundreds of logical fallacies that we all have to face as humans, and it's really important. I think of it in terms of software. I always say this about software, which is to be a great craftsman of the software, you have to know all of its limitations. And to be a great human is for us to greater know our limitations. Because we can work better as ourselves once we know what we're capable of doing and pushing against those barriers, right? There are certain barriers that we have. For example, we have various visual barriers. Every human has them. We see things that don't exist. We blend together in vision, right? You're seeing 2 different images. Our brain matches those 2 images together. And so there are actual blind parts of our vision. We have limitations. That's just part of our biology. But the better and more you know those things, the actual better you can be in terms of both potential and, of course, here, productivity. So I will check out. I will put that link in there for you all to check out. The next article is for you Ulysses users out there. Ulysses is a productivity app that allows you to kind of structure all kinds of things in like a weekly and daily planning environment. Are there any Ulysses users?
It's a
Augusto, are you?
fantastic writing. I use it for writing notebooks, for articles and short things. Ulysses is my call, my application for that.
Yeah, so there's just a really great article that I had come across, and if you want to check it out, it's by Sean Blank. It's on the Suite Setup, and he shows you how to create a productivity dashboard for weekly and daily planning using Ulysses. So if you are a writer and you want to use that for that purpose, go for it. Okay, next up, I wanted to talk about Francesco D'Alessio, our colleague and friend over at Keep Productive, the YouTube channel and podcast and newsletter and the media company that Francesco has developed. He put out an article on Medium recently that he called "The War of Note-Taking Apps," and he says he wanted to look into the battle of 2021 and his personal predictions related to note-taking apps and what he's calling the war of note-taking apps. In essence, he says that Rome and Obsidian are basically, have kind of risen in the ranks. And then he's talking about the growth and kind of mainstream approach of Notion. So talking about Notion, the reemergence of Evernote. In full disclosure, I suppose, I'm the Evernote Regional Leader for North America, one of the Evernote certified consultants, and actually, Dr. Buck, you are as well an Evernote certified consultant. So obviously, we have some fans of Evernote on the panel, but it doesn't make me not a fan, actually, of some of these other tools. And I've seen use cases for these where I just wouldn't use Evernote to do these things. And so it's really nice to see these other tools out there to do so. So any big ticket thoughts about the article? I'll continue to note here. I'll just put this out here, which is to say that Francesco noted here the winners are Notion 3. He wrote here E to E tools, and it says it feels like tools will get this by default. He's saying end-to-end encryption. So E to EE. So there's another E there. So end-to-end encryption tools, Standard Notes and Bear. He's seeing tools like Standard Notes and Bear will be the encryption options, and basically those are the options people will be gravitating toward for privacy. Then he says that Evernote 11, he says he has a feeling Evernote might be on the rise again. I would agree with him. It says something to the effect of Evernote focusing on end-to-end encryption and stability, and I'll come back to that because I have some thoughts there. So we're in Evernote version 10, not 11, so I'm not sure why he wrote Evernote 11 there, but that's okay. He wrote losers are Dynalist and Workflowy. I know that Art, I think you're a Workflowy fan out there, so you can comment on whether you think that Workflowy is going to be on the decline. And then of course he's guessing that Google, this is completely conjecture, but he's guessing that Google will buy Coda, and that Notion is going to be a buyout option for perhaps Apple, is what I'm reading here. I'm going to stop from there. But initial comments, initial thoughts related to kind of the development of note-taking apps and where you think various note-taking apps are today.
Well, I've always been one for the tried and true, that if it works, and of course, again, I'm an Evernote certified consultant, but I've been using Evernote for years. It makes sense. It just works. It's getting better. And of course, we all like something that's bright and shiny and new. And then we jump into it, and then we're dissatisfied because it doesn't do this, and then this are added. And soon we say, well, it's bloated. I sure liked it when it was simpler. And the circle goes round and round and round. I think Evernote is in a very good place. As I've watched YouTube videos that others have done, like on Notion and Rome and that sort of thing, I don't really see leaving Evernote for anything else right now.
there is one thing on that article that I think it is interesting. Um, when you think on the initial, this is before Evernote, okay, before really having power on your pocket, those were note taking apps. Okay. They were to really keep, that phone number, that really piece of information instead of have it on a piece of note and lose it. That was the goal of that. But as he said, now I should say personal knowledge apps. And I think in part, he's right on that. Those that we call note taking apps, they don't contain really notes anymore. They are more knowledge databases. It may be on the form of notes, maybe on the form of, I remember when the iPhone got released, okay, their notes didn't have folders, didn't have ways to classify or put images or any of that, or search even. It was massive, a pain. But Apigo, that Chris is famous or known for, had an application called Notebook, and it was the first app on the iPhone, at least that I remember, who could do notes in the proper way, with folders, with search, with organization, and all that. And that was so important for me because that was not note taking. That was more a knowledge database that I had. So it doesn't matter if you have it on OneNote or Evernote. A few percentage of people will change. Most people will not change because the hidden cost of go and learn the new app, discover the things that are invisible for you. Okay. None of them, OneNote and Evernote and Apple Note, there are certain things that you are simply not aware how much you use. That going now and change, it's really going to have a cost and a learning curve. So I don't know. I think it's not that people will not change, but the things to change need to really, really be massive for you to move all that information from one place to another, at least on the productivity circles where that is, more a knowledge database than scatter nodes.
I like that, Augusto. And I would chime in there and say, this is a mature market. These digital note solutions have been around for a while. I do remember a time when I couldn't quite understand the architecture of Evernote when I was an early user. And so I stumbled through it. But Art also points out OneNote, which was highlighted here. You've got the big players, Microsoft, Google, who have note solutions. You've got the note specific best of breed solutions like Evernote and Notion. Those are the two I know very well. And then you have all these task management apps. And so Francesco's biggest prediction is perhaps the most interesting thing to me, and that is, when are we going to see a tight integration between your task applications and your note-taking applications? And when we see that, that's when people will become very productive, being able to take raw notes and then track actions and follow-up and assignment to others, because that doesn't happen well today. I know there are some integration solutions. The second thing I would call out is there is still a large group of people who just use pen and paper or use whiteboards. How do we get people to become more productive by going from the analog system to a digital system? It hasn't happened yet, in large part. Those like us on this call, we like productivity apps, right? We're there. So there's no convincing of us. Are we going to sway to a new application? I don't think so. But how do these vendors win over individual people still using whiteboards and pen and paper? I think it's going to be some sort of technology that makes it really quick with text recognition to be able to take a picture, move that into a digital format that I can then quickly take action on.
Yeah, so I've got a couple thoughts here, and I don't want to take too much time because then we'll be here for another 3 hours about me talking about personal knowledge management. But PKM, different than, say, the 90s when we talked about PIMs, personal information managers, we have these terms that tend to kind of crop up, and we want to call applications what we think they are. And in the wild, they are very different creatures. So I challenge the idea here. I always want to say notion, and then I think people think I'm talking about the project, the product. So I challenge the idea here that applications like Evernote or OneNote or Notion or otherwise, Obsidian, Roam, Research, you name it, that they can be pigeonholed into any specific one category of tool. I think that we miss the point when we try to think about them as what we want them to be versus what happens in the hands of the average user. And I think of like the average daily user, right? Think of the average daily user. They are using it for ways you absolutely had no idea people should or would or could or want to use the tools. And that's something only the developers see. Things like with Evernote, I marveled watching Evernote make changes and why they make changes that they make public and tell us why they make those changes. Because at 250 million users, they see a scale of users that we can't possibly imagine. The data that they can collect and understand their users is just irrational to us, and not rationally capable of understanding on that level. And so I think about this from Apple Notes, from the level of Microsoft OneNote, from the level of Evernote. They have enough users. When you have 250 million users, where you have nearly 500 million users, that's the kind of scale where you start to see kind of the intricacies of humanity. And so I think Evernote can be used for personal knowledge management. So can OneNote, so can Notion, so can Obsidian, so can Coda and otherwise. That's not particularly the point though, which is that we need to have a tool that's versatile enough, kind of to Chris's point, that we can actually integrate these components so that they become seamless. One of the reasons why I've always gravitated toward Evernote and Remember the Milk is because those two tools work together seamlessly for me. And I have no friction between the two of them. I just use them and they just integrate and work well together. So the idea that we need to have an omni-platform, or we need to have Obsidian with the Zettelkasten concepts and all of these kinds of things kind of sound like nonsense to me, because we're not actually thinking about the average user. What average user is out there thinking, I need to set up a Zettelkasten system? Like, better yet, not even knowing that Zettelkasten exists. We in the productivity space are very myopically viewed on those things, and I always try to just broaden the view out to what's the average person using this system for, and do they even have a system? So if I take a person who has no system whatsoever and they're just trying to get things done, what should the tool do? And for me, that means having features that are easily accessible, but doesn't clutter the interface, and is basically an adaptable space. And we can see lots of programs starting to make that inroads. And so that's my prediction, is that more tools are going to become multi-purpose, and they're going to just kind of settle into the background so that they can do the things we need to when we need them to do them. Okay. As I said, I can talk about this for hours because I find it fascinating, but we've got to move on. Augusto, what's our next story this week? You're muted.
I said is to keep you on track. OmniFocus for the web. OmniFocus finally add support for custom perspective on the web. OmniFocus make a big move from being only Mac and iPad to add their web component to be able to use on any platform. And finally, you can use perspectives on the web, or custom perspective on the web. That is a really, really massive improvement. So for the OmniFocus users, especially those who are in that environment where they use certain OmniFocus on the house on the Mac and now can use it at work in the PC, it's a really, really big deal.
Fantastic. Next up is tough for me because I've had a bad experience with this tool, which is Newton Mail. So for those of you who don't know the story and the history, Cloud Magic was this wonderful email application that ultimately became Newton. Unfortunately, it went through this period where Cloud Magic changed its name, no problem, but basically they shut down the product. Then someone purchased it or something like that, and then they relaunched the product, and then they said, hey, here goes the product at this particular rate. You can buy the product, and then all of a sudden they changed their rate and became a much higher subscription cost, and it really just there were too many changes too soon. All of that said, the mail application, it's an email application, it is phenomenal. It is actually a really, really great application. The problem is actually all management. The fact that the management of the company was so poor that really led me off of it. So I kind of warn you up front with that fact. But That being the case, they have recently released a new set of features on Newton. They now have dark mode, and they have brought multi-swipe to the platform so that you can go ahead and swipe on mobile and tablet devices, so you can go ahead and process through the system. They also noted they have a better privacy policy. That's pretty good. But they've got a bunch of new features that they have coming and planned. I myself am. I'm in looking for a new email application, and so I've been looking at Newton again. I'm just really nervous about the fact that the last time I got sold on Newton, I really got frustrated and left them. So I want to love the application because it's fast, it's responsive, it handles all of my email accounts easily. But I'm just hoping that if I do sync my credit card down for Newton again, that they don't put me in another position where I have to all of a sudden drop everything and switch applications, because that's the definition of lack of productivity, when you have to switch applications without enough notice. Okay, next up, Augusto, you want to talk about Trello? Or you want me to?
You can go about
All right,
Trello, but
wonderful.
I love this article, so go
Yes.
for it.
So Trello just announced a new set of Trello keyboard shortcuts. So now you can, in essence, if you didn't know, if you hold down the Shift key and tap the /, that's the question mark, on your keyboard in any Trello environment. So whether that's in the browser or in the desktop applications, not on mobile because you can't, but you will get a series of a screen which will show you your keyboard shortcuts. Now you can tap certain keys and immediately capture those keyboard shortcuts without having to use the system-wide ones. So for example, if you tap Z, that will now undo the last action that you did and retrieve the work. So for example, if you accidentally overtyped something, you can just tap Z and it will go ahead and reverse that. It will reverse that item altogether. You can use Shift Z to go ahead and redo. In essence, if you corrected something and then you accidentally undid it, you can hit Shift Z and it will just redo that action and correct it again. And then finally, you can use R. R will now repeat a previous action. There are so many times when you want to like move something to someplace else, or you want to move it down to the bottom of the list, or you move a card over to another location. Well, now you can just literally hover your cursor over that particular list of cards, and whatever list you say dragged it to, now you can just keep clicking R and it will repeat the action of what you did. So you can really power through some really interesting features here. Card templates have come to mobile, fantastic, and they've also updated the map power-up. So if you have been using the map power-up, they've made some updates to the map power-up. I don't use it, so I don't know much about it, but that has also been done. Any
Yeah,
Trello
I am
users?
a big fan of keyboard shortcuts, and I've been, and the same way I said that the bigger obstacle for many people to be iPad only is their addiction to the mouse. I think part of that is because people use the mouse instead of keyboard shortcuts. When you learn to really use keyboard shortcuts, you stop using the mouse. The mouse comes a second thought. So the fact that Trello is adding this is really making Trello more and more powerful. So I'm excited about it.
Yeah, that keyboard shortcut right there at the very end, Ray, of repeating actions is probably the most exciting one, because I had big hopes a long time ago for Automator, that I'd be able to set up these workflows in my desktop environment, and it's been difficult. So to be able to simplify that in a Trello board and to be able to get things to repeat is exciting.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who doesn't know Butler inside of Trello, absolutely learn Butler and learn the keyboard shortcuts. My only current gripe is that if you are in Trello in the browser and Trello in the desktop applications, those do have different keyboard shortcuts. So that's a little bit of a challenge for me, because if I'm in the browser and I'm powering through a Trello board, then I go to the desktop application, I now have to rejigger my brain around which keyboard shortcuts still work in the desktop application, which runs on Electron.js framework. And so it's like one of those things where I'm like, oh gosh, these are different shortcuts, and now I have to remap my brain for thinking in that regard. So that is something we should all be mindful of. But I'm just excited to see Trello developing. They have the table view coming. It's currently in beta, and we're going to see table view come into play. So now you can have board view and then switch things into table view, which is going to really help with project management. That's where I use Trello so much. And Art is noting here that keyboard shortcuts are productivity gold, and
Yes,
I
they are.
absolutely agree with Art there. Okay, our last story before we get to the science of productivity is a podcast episode, actually, that was put out by the Less Doing podcast, Ari Meisel, who some of you may know. I've known Ari for many years, and he was just noting, in essence, that he's going to be scaling back the company, and he gives his reasons in the podcast. And so for those of you who kind of have ever thought about what you're doing with a company and all of that kind of inner turmoil about change. He kind of, explains it in the podcast episode. And I thought it was just really, really useful for all of us who are so productivity minded. Here goes somebody who built an efficiency company, like how to build a scalable company. He helps companies scale. And here he is kind of bearing his reasoning for wanting to step back from things and to basically purposefully not scale. And I think there's something to be said about that when we all deal with these issues. When the COVID-19 pandemic happened here in the United States, and I started thinking about how my company was going to adapt and change. These are the tough kinds of thoughts that we all keep internally, and we don't really share them many times to the public. And so just know that we all have to go through these periods and think through really what does it mean to do the things we want to do in life and enjoy those things. And that's a part of productivity, right? That's a part of us understanding what being and having a productive life is, concept of the good life. We want to be able to choose the right things, and it sounds like Ari Meisel is doing that. And so kudos to him, and it's well worth the listen in terms of just understanding that we all have different opinions about what we want to see and how we want to grow in life, and he's given that opportunity to air that for us.
Quick comment to you as well, Ray. I love the authenticity and transparency of Ari in this because every business wants to be perceived as very, very successful. And by golly, it's important to do a little self-reflection to say, where am I going and how am I going to get there? And is that the best way? And maybe I should spend time elsewhere. There's a great book called Doing Good Better. It's related to philanthropy, but it comes to mind here because it's essentially a book that says, if I want to create good, is it better for me to spend my money or my time to do good? And for a lot of people, they think they should spend their time at it, but it turns out their professions deliver better incomes that can then fund other people who are better served to do that good.
Yeah, when I listen to the podcast, there is an old article from, and I will put the notes on the link on the check notes, from Jeff Goins, where he talked about something similar. After he was getting his business, and growing the business and all that, he discovered, but I doing all this and making all these things happen. But what I like to do, that is writing, now I delegate it. What was the reason to initiate the business and what I wanted to do more of it is exactly because of scaling what I do the least of, because I end up delegating all that instead of really doing what I love and what I wanted to do more of it. So it is a really great, honest podcast to hear. Same thing as that article, and I will put the note in the show notes.
Fantastic. So with that ends our headlines this week. We are going to be on the flip side of this, and we're going to cover our featured story of the week. We're going to talk about Apple and their development of a search engine and what that means for our productivity. We'll cover our new tools of the week. But right now, we are going to hear the science of productivity with Matt Plummer from Zarvana. Take it away, Matt.
Welcome to the Science of Productivity segment. Each segment, I try to bring some new research for you on the topics of productivity and performance to help you accomplish your goals faster. In this segment, what I want to do is talk about some new research that illuminates the incredible power of taking ownership. So let's start with research from emergency room data. Some researchers from Harvard Business School took emergency room data from between 2007 and 2010, and they looked at the difference in performance of two different queuing systems. And by that we mean, so there is a a pooled queuing system in which all the patients go into one queue, and then it's assigned out from there to the different doctors. And then there's a dedicated queuing system, which basically each doctor had its own queue of patients that it would work down. And so then they said, okay, which one was more efficient and which one was more effective? And what one would think is that the pooled queuing system, the one where all the patients are together and then are distributed most efficiently to the doctors, that would generate better results because the system intrinsically, inherently is more efficient in terms of distribution of resources. But what they found actually is that when they compared these two different queuing systems, the dedicated queuing system where each doctor had their own queue had better results on 2 dimensions. So the length of stay, how long the patients were in the emergency room, went down 17%, and the average wait time even went down 9%. So why did this happen? Why did the dedicated queuing systems, which should be slower, less efficient, result in more efficient systems and better results? Well, according to the researchers, and I want to quote them, what they say is that improved performance stems from physicians' increased ownership over patients and resources. The power of ownership. I define ownership as taking responsibility for the outcomes of your work. So not just the output, but the outcomes. You take responsibility for it. And when you take responsibility, it increases your motivation to do the work. You invest, you add discretionary effort. And so ownership is really powerful. What these researchers then did is they said, well, let's take some mathematical models and simulations and try to see if these findings will apply to other fields. And what they found is that largely these results apply in fields where they're knowledge intensive and there's a high sense or a high level of customer ownership. And so they found that it would likely apply in medicine. Obviously, that's where it first started, personal banking, and even places like the Apple Genius Bar. Now, these findings resonate with research from Wharton professor Adam Grant, who found that when you look at university fundraisers and when you expose them to a scholarship recipient, the people they're raising funds for even just 5 minutes, that their fundraising amounts, the amounts they were able to fundraise, increased 400%. So this idea of taking ownership, of being motivated to do your work and actually take responsibility for the outcome of your work is a really powerful effect. So if you're trying to do work or trying to increase the efficiency of a team, focus, at least in part, on increasing ownership. That's it for this Science of Productivity segment.
Wonderful. Thank you, Matt. That was Matt Plummer from Zarvana with the Science of Productivity segment. And with that, that brings us along to our segment, which is New Tools of the Week. So each week, Augusto and I scour the interwebs for all of the various new tools and apps that are out there. And we also have tools that we use that we know and love. And so we talk to you about them. We tell you each of us brings a new tool of the week, and we invite our panelists to also share one with you. So let's get started with our new tools of the week. The first tool is a tool we've actually lightly talked about today, which is Coda. I first came into contact with Coda because it was used for the David Allen Company's GTD Summit that happened, I believe that was in 2019. And so David Allen had put together this summit, this virtual summit, and in essence what they did was they used Coda as a living document of sorts to be able to share with everyone all the various parts of the summit. And I just thought it was of this really remarkable application. And so what Coda does is it gives you the ability to, in essence, create a living document and use that data in kind of a very seamless way. You don't have to know coding. You don't have to do all of those pieces. You could just basically put all of the data into the system, and it goes ahead and gives you kind of a database on the front end, while still giving you the styling and the productivity tools in that same environment. So think of it being akin to kind of Airtable or maybe even Fibery or other tools like that that give you that kind of sense of control and seeing the data in different ways that are useful to you. I just really like it. It's a useful tool for being able to share things with folks, and fits into that kind of space of data management in a way that really works for everybody. Okay, Augusto, what is your tool this week?
So the tool for me is called Lowcast, and the story happens that my 7-year-old loves baseball, and he wanted to see the World Series, and he was really frustrated about it. So we don't have cable. We cut the cable, I think, before he was born. So he don't know that we have never have cable, but the fact is he wanted to watch baseball. And we discovered this app. You can donate money to them, but especially you can watch local TV using the Android, using Apple Store, Apple TV. So we have it on the Apple TV, Amazon Roku, and many more things. But now he can go there and watch his baseball. That is what he wanted to watch. But it's a great way to get the local channels if you don't have an H antenna, or really it's not that great and you just want to put it to the web, to the Apple TV. It's low resolution, but for what he wanted to watch was perfect. So if you are in the interest of getting some local channels, this is a fantastic way.
Fantastic. Thanks, Augusto. Dr. Buck, what's your tool this week? You're muted.
There we go. That's better. Unmuted now. Mine is a website, and I'm not sure how new it is. I just know it's new to me. But pdfbear.com. Working with PDFs it can sometimes be a real pain. But this just gives you a number of ways to convert Word to PDF, PDF to Word, put pages of a PDF together, split pages apart. Now, for years, I've used a similar website called PDF Candy. Really sort of does the same thing, but it's always good to have a backup because you never know when one site that's, especially one that's free, is going to go belly up. So this gives gives us a new player in that arena. For example, a lawyer not too long ago contacted me and she said, I've got this PDF, I've got a brief, it's in PDF form. I've got to add this Word document into an appendix. How in the world am I going to do that? Well, we just use PDF Candy, or could you use PDF Bear here to split the pages apart, convert what needed to be added into PDF, and then just merge the pages back together. You can put them in any order you want to, and just very easy to do. It's just dragging things onto the screen. You can have a free account that does some things. You can pay money and it'll do even more things. But it's just a really nice tool, I think, to have in your arsenal of
extension
tricks
associated with it, as well as being able to just use the web instance itself. Fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Buck. Chris, what is your app this week?
Excellent. So thank you for giving me a chance to talk about it. To Do Cloud is, this is a bit self-serving, but To Do Cloud is one of the applications for productivity purposes. We have iOS, Android, web, Mac desktop, and Windows desktop, and we have a Chrome extension. So it fits in nicely. Yes, I'm the product manager and strategist, so it's a bit self-serving, but it's a very capable tool. It's been around since 2008, and I'm pretty excited about what we're developing for iOS and Big Sur. iOS specifically has a wind down mode and a widgets capability, and we're taking advantage of that. So it's a really nice way for a productivity person at the end of the day to make a list of things in their wind down sequence of the things that they need to be done the next day, or a quick view of all their tasks from the widget view on their home screen. Two really quick things. I also, Ray, dropped in a second application, if I might make a mention of this, ParseHub. ParseHub about a week ago became one of my favorite tools, and ParseHub is a screen scraping tool, and it is really, really capable. They have a very generous free tier, which is what hooked me. I built out my sequence. I basically was trying to gather data from a public directory. Well, this tool allowed me to program the bot that navigated the public directory and clicked multiple times through the searches and captured and extracted data from this public directory, right? So it's all legitimate. It's all, I could have done it by hand, but ParseHub made it super simple to do. And I used screen scraping tools years ago, but this one has my attention now because it's so quick and capable. So those are my 2 tools. Thanks, Ray.
Fantastic. Wonderful. So that was the new tools of the week. And that, of course, takes us along to our story of the week. Today's story of the week is that Apple, there was a story out of the Financial Times, basically, that the rumor mill started that Apple was creating their own search engine to rival Google's search. And so I thought it would be interesting for us to have this discussion. Augusto and I kind of had this conversation about it being interesting for us to discuss what the concept of an Apple search engine would look like. And this is my time to make a pot shot at Apple because if anything, if they haven't learned anything from the Apple Maps debacle, they are attempting to challenge Google in Google's dominant space, which is search. Now, this is in the
try to out Google.
Right, exactly. And again, this is in the context of something important, which is that Google has now had a kind of a political situation come about with the Department of Justice basically, filing in confluence with several other attorneys general an antitrust violation lawsuit against them, and this is going to take years to play out in the courts. But the reality is that this is a political environment, and Google is trying to play it cool in that space. They've come out very strongly against the lawsuit, and I think they will prevail. And I think they have a pretty good argument against this because of the reasoning for the lawsuit and the way in which it was filed and so on and so forth. But the reality is that Apple and Google are negotiating right now for that multi-billion-dollar, I don't actually know how much it is, but it's a lot of money that Google pays Apple every year to be available as the primary search engine on their devices. And so here we are at a place where Apple may start surfacing their own search above Google in that space. And what does that really mean for our productivity?
So let the fan of Apple, put his flag in here, and I agree with the maps thing. I don't think it was wrong. I mean, it's taken years to make it, but also Google had years ahead. As you said, the rumor, according to the DOJ, is that is between $8 and $12 billion that Apple receive from Google. But also, it's important to take into consideration that even that this will take years, will also take years for Apple to develop something good. DuckDuckGo, for example, has taken time to get to decent level, but there is nothing else in the market. Okay, I mean, sorry, Bling doesn't bling, and there is nothing else in the market. And if Google gets in trouble with the government and they get to be limited because of the vision of the government, then what is going to happen? The other thing that may be interesting is what game is going to play Google in the sense, or Apple in the sense that Google plays the advertising game. Okay, and now what's going to be the game that Apple is going to play? Because $12 billion. Oh, here is Art coming with me. So $12 billion, even on the size of Apple, this is still a nice amount of change. So what is going to be better? Get into a game. For Apple to get into that game, I believe, need to be on something that will produce more than $12 billion. Now, when you're thinking on a project that will produce more than that, that's an interesting project to see what they have on the back end to make them consider this.
If I can chime in, it's going to be interesting to see how they tie search into the assistant Siri and whether they can enable Siri to be more effective doing audio searches than the current technologies today. Because we have an Alexa in our home, and it does decent search results. It works well with basic search results, but beyond the what's the weather or what's the news headline, it doesn't deliver great results today. And I think that is the potential of Apple to tie those two technologies together.
Oh, I will send my 7-year-old to your house for a week. He will train your Alexa like you have no idea.
So art is noting here that search in Siri is the next Bing and Cortana. I think that's a snide comment, and I am right there with you. I don't think that Apple can do this well. They can do a lot of things really well, predominantly hardware, and they can write limited software that can work and integrate among those pieces of hardware. They have not done well when they've tried to create cross-platform software as infrastructure. And search is infrastructure. It is not its own uh, platform or ecosystem, and Siri is still kind of limited in its abilities, and I think it will continue to be limited in its abilities even with search added as a feature. I think they're going to lose a lot more money than they would gain if they were to try and develop a search engine. Are they really going to try and go into the advertising space and challenge DoubleClick inside Google? Google Ads is really dominant in that space. Facebook is the next biggest arm there, and they're potentially going to hurt themselves geopolitically if they try to challenge Facebook in that sense. I think Zuckerberg is willing to cut off his own left arm to be able to continue to challenge their dominance in social search. And so there's a lot going on there that I don't think Apple can really make themselves dominant in that space. Better yet, even a competent competitor. So I'm more than happy to see what they develop, but I think this is going to fall into the rubbish pile pretty quickly. This is an internal private project they're building. Obviously, they're trying to take advantage of this situation. Quite honestly, I think it could bode well for Google. In all disclosure, I am the Google Small Business Advisor for Productivity, so clearly I am in the camp of Google being dominant in search and continuing to be in search because it works so well for myself and my clients, both personally and professionally. But we have a lot of really good search engines out there. We don't need another one, and I don't think that Apple is the right company to do that. To be quite honest, I wish that Microsoft would better and put more energy into Bing. I think that Microsoft with Azure and its ability to see data at that scale can do a much better job than Apple. And I think that Microsoft's reasons for pulling back Cortana and pushing it more toward enterprise was a mistake for them. And Art can speak better to this than I can, but I really feel like Microsoft could have done a better job here in challenging Google in search, and they still fit in that whatever it is 4 or 5% of search that they currently dominate as their next biggest competitor, and they could really do a much better job, and they could be what Apple is to hardware right now, which is the privacy focused search engine, right? They could buy DuckDuckGo. They could become the privacy aware search engine, and buy Wolfram Alpha. Is that correct? Wolfram Alpha. They could buy all of those and really do something there.
Not to compete with Google on the advertising, but to tie it up with this privacy. And now we're going to have this browser, this search engine that will keep your privacy. That will be an interesting game for Apple to get in.
Yeah, Art is noting here that Bing is moving more inside the corporate world than the public one. And I think, it makes a lot of sense, but I also see there being a real opportunity here that Apple, with its current, they're in 20th place if they launch tomorrow. Better yet, giving Google another 2 to 3 years of lead time in developing out its neural network and AI frameworks that are really just rocketing out of the park. And Google Cloud just announced this year at Cloud Next the ability for them to do in essence secure, basically encrypted data in process, right? So in use. So now we not only have encrypted data at rest, encrypted data in transit, but encrypted data in use. And so if Bing is going to try and challenge the corporate world, they're not going to really make much inroads when Google Cloud can offer 3 sets of encryption that no other technology I've seen out there can do. And then for Apple to step out there and say that they're going to be the privacy-focused, search engine potentially, I don't know if that's what they're going to say, but it's one of those things. And Art is jokingly saying that he's waiting for Tim Cook to announce that Apple has now invented search, which is typically what Apple does. It comes out and it presents a product that's been on the market for many years, and they say that they invented it. That being the case, any final comments from the panel on Apple Search?
Yeah, if I can make just a couple, and I'll volunteer that they're not as well studied as your thoughts, Ray, and you shared a lot there that would be interesting to unpackage and talk through in more detail. But you think about Steve Jobs; he was the visionary leader who launched, who really made the Mac brand a consumer brand, not just a digital advertising creative person's machine. And he launched the iPod and the iPhone. Tim Cook has had a bit more of a difficult job to launch new products that are revolutionary, but he's been a great iterative leader at Apple. I will say I would love to see someone else that's more competitive with Google, because I feel a little bit at risk with its dominance in the search market. I also feel a little bit vulnerable with the advertising dollars that propel Google, because I don't know what search results are on page 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I don't go there. So very well, Google could be controlling and manipulating the results based on ad dollars, plus their algorithm that delivers value. You know, I'm influenced by the Social Dilemma, a Netflix documentary that was very compelling about how ad dollars are manipulating the experience that we have on social platforms. Well, the same thing happens in search. So I would love for Apple to come with a new model that's not driven by advertising. And there are so many consumers out there that have adopted their tools that are not technologically savvy, that they're going to do a better job than I would say other vendors have. And I don't think Microsoft did a great job, even though it had dominance in hardware. Maybe we'll say that it's a business dominance versus a mom and pop average person who uses devices and might be an Apple user with their iPads, their iPhones, their watches, and maybe a Mac desktop. And maybe Apple will be able to deliver search to all of us that competes more effectively in that search market and takes away some of the strong market share that Google has. That's my hope.
Yeah, I would only challenge the point that in some way, shape, or form, Google themselves is monolithic. The reality is that Alphabet, as a holding company, holds multiple pieces to what we colloquially call Google, is multiple companies with multiple different pieces, and many times there's lots of infighting that happens directly inside of Google. It's well known that Google has these factions that don't really control any part of the system. So Google is its own worst enemy here. I think more than any other challenger in the market, Google is their own worst enemy. And they have to actually, I mean, we've talked about this on the show before, which is their communication strategy with Hangouts and Gmail and Google Duo and Google Chat and Google. You name the products that they have come out and killed over time, and so this ends up being Google infighting, right? Dealing with who's going to be the dominant piece in this. Is it going to be Google Meet now? Are they going to be the dominant communications tool on the platform, or are they going to be deprecated and lost to a new tool that somebody in a side project created and everybody thought was the next thing that they should publish into the world? So. If anyone is going to outdo Google in search, it's going to be Google. And if anyone is going to topple Google, it'll be Google. So that's my kind of thoughts there. And if it's going to be another competitor that will come out and do better than Google, I'm all for it. I don't think that Google actually is worse off for that reason. But with all of the IoT out there that is supported by Google now, the Google Assistant that is, I think we are in a much better place. And I'm of two minds here. I think what you're talking about, Chris, is really important, that we actually focus on privacy, and especially with more federal regulation coming out, similar to the GDPR and what California has put out in terms of their Protection Act, Data Protection Act. As we see that happen, it will become progressively more difficult for other companies to come in and challenge in that space. And so it will be imperative, it will be really incumbent upon the governments of the world to decide how our data is both controlled and protected in that sense. But then on the other side of it, I honestly don't want my data in all of these places, right? If we have more competition in this space, then I have to go outside of Microsoft and Apple and Verizon or whatever your major telecom is, AT&T, and Google, and my data becomes more diffuse and in so many other places, that makes me less secure. So I'm always really concerned about those pieces. It's like you have to trust a few, and there is that competing force of those 2 points. But I take it to heart, and I take it seriously, both my own privacy and security, but also everybody else's, as we have to make some of these hard choices regarding those. Any final thoughts?
Great commentary. I like that. Thank you.
No problem. All right. That brings us to the end of Anything But Idle. And before we close out, I just wanted to give our panelists an opportunity to tell us where we can keep up to date with them and keep on top of the work that they are doing. Dr. Buck, I'll put you up first. Where can folks keep in touch with you and up to date regarding your work out there in the world?
Come over to frankbuck.org. And when you get there, first thing, just hop on the mailing list. Got 2 really great gifts for you. And follow me on Twitter and Instagram. I'm at Dr. Frank Buck. In other words, at Dr. Frank Buck on both Twitter and Instagram.
Wonderful. Thank you for being here on the show, Dr. Buck. And then Chris, how can folks keep on top of your work, keep up to date with you, or connect with you?
Thanks, Ray. I'm using a traditional approach. People are welcome to email me at chris@appigo.com. That's appigo.com, chris@appigo.com. Thanks so much.
Thanks for being here. All right, Augusto, we are closing out the show. Another one in the bag. Episode 27 is done. Thanks so much for joining me, as always, and helping to make Anything But Idle happen. Wonderful.
My pleasure.
Great.
See you
And so
next
with
week.
that, that is Anything But Idle. Please let us know if there's a story we missed. I mean, we can't track everything in the world. And if we did miss a story, head over to anythingbutidle.com. There on the website, you can click on contact. You can go ahead and leave us a message, send us a message. We have our DMs open on Twitter at anythingbutidle. You can tweet at us, so reply to us, or you can DM us on Twitter at anythingbutidle. If you have a question or comment, Anything But Idle as well. Head on over there, and we are happy to respond to you if we need to. While you're on Anything But Idle, each episode we have the embedded video for the show that we recorded, as well as the podcast episode itself. But we have the show notes with all the links, to click to for the stories of the week. The new tools of the week are there, and any extra stories or anything else like that we collect along the way. There's also a text transcript that we produce. It's machine transcribed, so it's not super accurate, but you can jump to sections and kind of understand what we talked about throughout the episode. If this is your first time watching us on the live stream, feel free to subscribe to the show so that you get notified of our weekly live streams. If you're listening to the podcast, you can go ahead and subscribe by going to anythingbutidle.com and clicking on that subscribe tab, and it has instructions for how to subscribe in your favorite podcast app. Thanks to everybody for watching this show, listening to the show. If you can leave us a rating or review in Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or wherever you listen to your podcast that allows you to leave a rating or review, that really helps us grow our listening community. And so thank you. With that, take care, everybody. Here's to your productive life.